The rescue crew found the BelAZ 3 days after the sky turned black. It was standing crooked on the upper hall road above the pit, half buried in wet grey ash, its giant tires sunk almost to the rim. The windshield was opaque, the grille was packed solid. Ash had worked its way into the radiator, the brake housings, the intake system, and every seam the machine had. The engine would not turn. The truck looked less like a vehicle and more like a monument left behind by disaster. And yet the strangest part was this. The BelAZ had not been destroyed by mechanical failure, it had been beaten by the mountain itself. Weeks earlier, the mine had been loud, bright, and busy. Haul trucks moved in a constant rhythm from the loading face to the crusher. Shovels bit into dark, volcanic rock. Drills hammered bench after bench. In the dispatch room, the map lights never went out. On paper, it was just another hard season in a remote open-pit operation in the Russian Far East. In reality, the whole site was working in the shadow of a volcano that had started to wake up. At first, the warnings were easy to ignore. A few tremors under the workshops, fine dust drifting down from slopes that should have been quiet, steam where there had never been steam before. Then came the deeper signs. Small rock falls on access roads, muddy runoff where the ground had been dry, a bitter sulfur smell carried by the wind before sunrise. The geologists noticed it. The older operators noticed it. Even some mechanics, men who trusted steel more than superstition, began to talk about the mountain in lower voices. But production targets did not move just because the earth was restless. The pit had contracts to fill. Trains were waiting. The weather window was short. Every lost day in that region cost serious money. Management reduced non-essential work near the upper benches, tightened the monitoring schedule, and kept the fleet moving. That was how remote operations often survived, not by stopping at the first sign of danger, but by convincing themselves they still had time. The BelAZ fleet was at the center of everything. These were not elegant machines. They were huge, blunt, practical, and built for punishment. Their frames carried loads that would crush ordinary trucks. Their suspension took impacts that would shatter lighter equipment. Their engines were made to pull through long climbs, rough roads, and weather that could turn a haul route into a trap in a single shift. Day after day, they hauled blasted rock out of the pit and made the entire operation possible. One of those trucks was assigned to the upper road on the morning the disaster began. The driver had started before dawn. The air was cold enough to sting. Visibility was good. The loader at the face was already working. Nothing in the first hour looked like the beginning of a catastrophe. There was noise, vibration, diesel smoke, radio traffic, and routine. Then the tremor hit. Not a long, rolling quake, a sharp, violent shock, the kind that makes a machine feel light for 1 second and too heavy the next. The shovel operator stopped first. Then came a second jolt. Dust rolled off the high wall. One of the spotters yelled into the radio that rock was moving on the eastern slope. Another voice cut across the channel and said the plume above the volcano had changed shape. Men in 3 parts of the pit were speaking at once. No one had the full picture, only fragments, dust, falling rock, steam, reduced visibility. Pull back from the upper roads, stand by, keep moving, repeat, keep moving. And then the sky changed color. It did not fade gradually. It turned from gray morning into a heavy brown-black lid, advancing across the mine from the north. The first ash arrived like dry sand thrown by the wind. It tapped against windows and body panels. Then it thickened. Within minutes, visibility collapsed. Headlights became pale circles in a wall of moving grit. The loader disappeared. The dispatch tower vanished. The pit, which had seemed enormous an hour earlier, suddenly felt sealed shut. The BelAZ on the upper road had a load on. Loaded trucks do not turn into nimble escape vehicles when panic starts. They become slow, heavy commitments. Every decision takes longer. Every meter matters more. The driver had one job now: get down without losing the truck, the load, or his own life. He started the descent with Ash already packing under the wipers. The road was changing under him in real time. Fine material covered hard ground in some places, but in others it mixed with runoff and became a slick grey paste. The shoulder disappeared. Marker posts vanished. Every familiar landmark was erased under the same dead color. The truck moved, but the mine he knew was gone. Over the radio came broken messages. A grader had stalled near the west switchback. A light vehicle was missing. 2 men from the fuel point had gone on foot. Someone said the workshop roof had taken debris. Someone else said the conveyor line was down. Then one voice, more controlled than the rest, cut through and told all operators to abandon upper bench work and bring every machine they could to stable ground. That order came just late enough to matter. The ashfall intensified. Ventilation intakes began to clog. Engine temperatures rose. Men who had spent years around dust and blasted rock were suddenly dealing with something far worse. Volcanic ash is not ordinary dirt. It cuts, packs, slips past weak seals, blocks filters, contaminates oil, and turns movement itself into wear. The BelAZ kept descending. For a few minutes it looked like the driver might make it. Then the road gave way. Not in one cinematic collapse, but in the way real roads fail under layered stress. First, the outer edge slumped. Then the surface cracked in a line ahead of the front axle. Water and ash surged up through the fissure. The loaded truck tilted, corrected, and tilted again. The driver stopped before the front wheels dropped into the soft shoulder. He could not risk reversing blind. He could not keep going forward. He was trapped on a road that was no longer a road. The engine was still running then. He tried the radio again. Static, fragments, nothing useful. Outside, the storm deepened. Ash hissed against the cab. Heat from the engine compartment mixed with the sulfur smell in the air. Through the side glass, he could see nothing beyond a few meters of swirling grey. He made the hardest decision an operator can make. He shut the truck down and abandoned it. Leaving a BelAZ in the middle of a disaster goes against instinct. Operators trust their machines. They stay with them. They believe one more minute, one more correction, one more try might save the unit and save themselves. But there are moments when a machine becomes a coffin if you remain in it. This was one of those moments. And if you enjoy stories like this about giant machines, real danger, and survival under pressure, subscribe to the channel. He took only what he could carry: a respirator, a jacket, and a hand lamp. He stepped down onto ash that swallowed his boots almost to the ankle and moved toward lower ground by memory more than sight. Behind him, the BelAZ disappeared into the storm. By afternoon, the mine was unrecognizable. The eruption column rose above the region and turned daylight into a false evening. Ash swept across the access roads. Drainage channels clogged. Water mixed with fresh deposits and cut grey slurry across the haul routes. Several smaller machines were abandoned where they stood. A drill rig near the eastern face was knocked partly sideways by falling rock. The fuel yard was buried. 2 portable buildings collapsed under the weight of ash. The outer maintenance lot looked as if every machine had been covered in grey cement. The greatest danger was not the first impact. It was what followed. Ash kept falling. Roads kept weakening. Every hour, damage became harder to see and more serious. Machines that looked intact from the outside were already being ruined from within. When the rescue team reached the upper road 3 days later, they expected wreckage. Instead, they found the BelAZ standing where the driver had left it. That was almost worse. A destroyed truck tells a simple story. This one told a harder one. The frame was upright. The body had not rolled. The cab was battered, but intact. But the cooling system was packed solid. Brake components were contaminated, electrical contacts were fouled, and the intake system had turned into abrasive sludge. From a distance, the truck looked recoverable. Up close, it was crippled. The first mechanic who climbed onto it understood immediately what they were dealing with. If they cranked that engine carelessly, they could destroy what the eruption had left alive. So the recovery became slow, methodical, and brutal. The machine was towed only after crews stabilized the damaged road around it. Dozers worked in short, controlled pushes to create ground that would hold. Water trucks could not solve the problem because wet ash often made conditions worse. Every step had to be measured. Every hose, line, and fitting had to be treated as contaminated until proven clean. When they finally brought the BelAZ back to the workshop zone, the truck was stripped deep. Filters were discarded. Intake lines were removed and cleaned. The cooling pack was washed cell by cell. Housings were opened. Fluids were checked for grit. Seals were inspected. Brake assemblies were dismantled. Wiring was dried, cleaned, and reconnected. Mechanics worked under respirators with grey dust settling on their shoulders, trying to save a machine some supervisors had already written off. They saved it because the mine needed every truck it could keep. That is the part outsiders rarely understand. After a disaster, the work does not get lighter. It gets more urgent. Roads must be rebuilt. Drainage must be recut. Fallen material must be moved. Supplies must reach the camp. Damaged equipment must be dragged, lifted, stripped, repaired, or cannibalized. And all of that still depends on heavy machinery. The same machines nearly destroyed by the event are often the only reason the site can recover. That was where the BelAZ mattered most. The mine's mechanics started modifying the surviving fleet for ash conditions. Intake systems were extended higher where possible. Extra pre-cleaners were fitted. Cab seams were taped before shifts. Service intervals were shortened aggressively. Operators cleaned glass constantly, because visibility could vanish again in a single windy hour. Grease points were checked more often. Brake heat was watched more closely. The ash got into everything. It ate at hydraulic rods, worked into hinges, and turned routine maintenance into a battle against particles too fine to respect ordinary boundaries. Rain converted it into paste. Then the sun dried that paste into a crust that had to be broken loose by hand. But the road system had to come back. Without haul routes, the crushers stayed quiet, the stockpiles shrank, the camp starved, and the whole site slipped from emergency into collapse. So the rebuilt machines went out one by one, then shift by shift, then in groups. Dozers cut drainage channels through buried bends. Graders reshaped switchbacks. Excavators pulled collapsed material off the shoulders. And when enough of the lower roads were stable, the repaired BelAZ returned. Not for ceremony. Back to work. That may be the most honest thing about heavy equipment. A machine survives hell, comes back from the workshop, and is rewarded with another load. The first day the BelAZ rolled again, the operators watched it more carefully than usual. They were not doubting the mechanics. They understood what that truck represented. It had stood alone in the ash. It had nearly been lost without flames, without an explosion, and without the kind of visible destruction people usually associate with catastrophe. It had been ruined quietly and rebuilt the hard way. That kind of survival earns respect fast in a mine. The truck's comeback did not mean the danger was over. For months, the site kept paying for the eruption. Components wore faster than they should have. Cutting edges vanished against grit. Bearings ran hotter. Filters loaded early. Haul roads that looked sound in the morning could soften by afternoon if runoff shifted below them. Men learned to read the ground again. A drag at the front axle. A different note in the engine fan. A change in how the truck settled under braking. Small signals that kept operators alive when the landscape itself had turned unreliable. In time, the mine stabilized. It was not because the mountain became harmless, and not because management suddenly became wise. It stabilized because crews adapted faster than the damage could finish them. Mechanics changed how they protected the fleet. Operators changed how they drove, stopped, and judged the road. Supervisors changed where they were willing to send men and machines. Recovery in a place like that is never a single heroic moment. It is 1,000 disciplined decisions made after fear has already arrived. Years later, people still remembered the truck on the upper road. Not because it was the biggest machine on site, and not because it looked dramatic, buried in ash. They remembered it because it told the truth about industrial disasters. The real damage is not always the instant of impact. Sometimes it is the invisible part that follows. The ash in the intake, the grit in the oil, the seal that will fail next week, not today. The road that holds one more pass, then collapses under the next. The warning signs people talk themselves past because the shift is already underway and the load still has to move. That BelAZ became a lesson written in steel. Heavy machines do not conquer nature. They negotiate with it until the deal breaks. And when it breaks, survival belongs to the crews who recognize the danger early, the mechanics who refuse shortcuts, and the operators who know when to shut a machine down and walk away. Because sometimes the smartest thing you can do in a BelAZ is not force it through. It is to leave it behind long enough to bring it back alive. Subscribe for more BelAZ stories, heavy equipment disasters, and survival under extreme conditions.